And hi, welcome to Breaking Bread Infinity Podcast. Today, I want to introduce you to an amazing guy. His name is Tony, and he is a wonderful creator, artist, just a brainiac of information. I need you to listen closely and pay attention to what he's doing because he's going to change your mind in ways and make you think about things that you never thought about before. He's going to bring you through his little time warp, and you're going to enjoy it. It's going to be so exciting. Stay tuned, pay attention. Thank you for joining us at Breaking Bread Infinity Podcast. Welcome to Breaking Bread Infinity Podcast again. Thank you, community members, for chiming in with us. And we have a special guest. Again, I'll announce who I am. I am Moni Love.
Yeah, I'm Central G.
And you are?
Central G. Here.
And we have our wonderful guest with us today, and he's going to say who he is, where he's from, and how he's come to join us today.
Okay. I go by the name of Doe. That's A''DOE''A. It stands for American Descendant of Enslaved Africans. I chose the name because I wanted it to be something that represented the art and what the art was about, and what it will always be about going forward.
You're specifically talking about your artwork.
Yeah, the artwork. And as far as using that name, I wanted the artwork and the message behind the artwork to be centered in the name itself.
Absolutely.
And so I was like, it kind of goes back to that thing where I think it was like ancient Rome or someplace like that, where I kind of heard it in passing, so I may be a little bit wrong, but it was like a lot of artists during the Renaissance and probably before that, they didn't sign their work because they wanted the work to be about where it came from.
Absolutely.
It came from God, and they realized that they were only simply a vessel, and that they didn't deserve to put their name on their work. So it's like that's sort of what I wanted, because although it speaks to like my ancestors, your ancestors, our ancestors, and and it being about them. Because if I had a choice, knowing what I know now, I wouldn't have chosen to be an artist because it comes with so much responsibility. And I'm talking about before you even get the artwork to the public. It comes with being responsible, like in terms of, be consistent, researching, understanding what you're doing, dealing with the mental health aspect of it, because it could drive you crazy if you're constantly thinking about these things over and over and over again. But as far as like the name, the artwork, I just really want it to be about those people who look like me, whose voices have, either been dimmed or sometimes eradicated and pushed to exist on the fringes of society.
How long have you been doing that work?
Here, I've been doing it maybe about a couple of months.
Not here, you mean just in this city?
Yeah, just right where I'm at in life, literally only a couple of months. Before that, it was 8 years. Like it had been 8 years since I did anything, seriously with art. It was like a lover that I had lost interest in. It just wasn't there for me anymore. And there were times over the course of the 8 years where I found myself at restaurants like Macaroni Grill, where they have the paper on the table. I'd be like, okay, just sitting there sketching while people talking, and before I knew it, I have a whole little face I've drawn or something or doodled, and people were like, I didn't know you was an artist or you into art. You can draw. Not telling them that was my major in college. Not telling them that I have a history with the with the art world, and interning with like some well-known artists. Just letting them know that they only knew me from the guy who joined the military and got out and tried to start his own business. That was it. But it was more so, life happened. It left me. I didn't have time to paint, didn't have the space to paint, didn't have the space to sculpt, none of that. So it's like, I was just relegated to just like doing doodles over the course of the 8 years. And getting back here to New Orleans, like when I moved here last summer, like I was like, okay, well, I can diddle in this a little bit. And being here in this place where all this culture existed, I was like, I like it. I like it. It tastes good.
It
tastes good.
It feels good.
And it felt good. Like, I'm not going to lie to you. Like, I've always tell people that I think that New Orleans should be like the epicenter of Black American culture. And not just New Orleans. If it's going to be the epicenter, it should also include some of those other major cities throughout the South, like Jackson, Mississippi. Because well, of course, what's going on now? That's my home.
Yeah, there's a lot that's happening in Jackson, Mississippi. We'll touch on that.
But yeah, like I would say Jackson, Mississippi, Atlanta, Birmingham, Mobile, Alabama, the entire Gulf Coast area.
The entire Gulf Coast, yeah.
Yeah, like going all the way to Houston. So it's like from just being here, like in this place, like there was an osmosis that happened, being around so much culture, like where else could you, as they say, where could you go? Where could you go? Where you can wake up at 6 a.m. and walk through the French Quarter and hear somebody practicing like on their saxophone, like out in the open, and it's echoing and bouncing off the buildings. Like where else could you go where you can get beignets early in the morning and a drink? Like I'm like, okay, this is my speed. This is what I need in life. But this place is just magical. It is so magical.
I've heard people say that before.
And somebody from New Orleans told me that, when I was telling them like how I got back here and how I got back into art and everything that happened, they just simply responded, well, New Orleans is a siren who sings her children's song. They will come. They will hear her voice. And it will be irresistible. So I would say that, after the 8 years, life happened, made some wrong decisions, some right ones, and I landed it back here because this is a place I knew I've always wanted to come back to, and just plant myself down and see, what grew, and this grew, the new sense of self. So yeah, like New Orleans.
You found yourself in this community, and you feel inspired by the surroundings that you're in.
Not just this community, because I noticed how things are being shaped within this community specifically, but I will just say all of New Orleans, all the neighborhoods. Like, if it's a neighborhood to go to, I got in my car on Saturdays, Fridays, whatever, different odd times of the day, because I wanted to see what was it like living here as a local, as opposed to only visiting over the years as a tourist and being spoon-fed, all things that
culture, everything that's
like that, And I'm like, okay, it has to be more. So I want to know what 3 o'clock traffic look like. I want to know what the grocery stores look like, at random, parts of the day. And it's like just pushing myself out there and going to those little places that looks like a regular house, but on the inside it's a bar. Like it's music, it's belly dancers, like all this stuff. I'm like, okay, I can dig this. It's very inconspicuous. It's like I guess for me, I felt like coming to New Orleans creatively, and even as a Black person, like I was being given the password to like something ancient, something, ancient and fresh, and like something that fills you up, like backroom access to like Blackness.
It's like that back art world. So like New Orleans is also, like you said, full of culture, full of art. So like once you get into that art space in New Orleans, that's when it started opening up doors and started opening up opportunities. Like, okay, I can put my artwork in maybe this area, or here's another artist you could work with, or this artist might get inspiration from you. It's just a background, just our network of artists down in New Orleans that you could really talk to or really connect with.
Yeah, and I will say this, like I will say, like okay, this goes back to being a Southern Black person. Like, how when you walk into a room, you read a room and you find your spot. So people don't mess with you. You find your corner, you sit back and people watch until you feel comfortable enough to engage. Well, I got in New Orleans and I sat back and found my little corner over here where I live at. And, I sat in the corner and watched how everything moved around me. Yeah. And then I played double dutch with certain, areas and certain groups of people and see where I got in at and found my rhythm. And honestly, I've been here a year. July made exactly 1 year. But it wasn't until like 2 months before my year anniversary came up that I started getting plugged into. So it took me a long time, like a year, well, technically a year, to find my rhythm and find out what communities I fit into. And it's like the funny thing about it is not that those other communities rejected me. It's just that, either they moved a little bit faster than, what I was accustomed to, or there may have been a time where I had to catch up coming to New Orleans, because this city is Southern, but it has its own twang. And if you don't jump in at the right time, you could trip over yourself.
I totally agree with that, and your perspective on what you brought to the table. But I also want to throw out there that those little pockets of what you mentioned before, the little pockets of each community and how they operate. You know, each little part of the city has this little tribe, right? And we have a focus on artwork, you know, that's kind of all over the place, but they're not all over the place, is what I see. So we have the Ogden Museum, we have NOMA, we have New Orleans African American Museum, which is, to me, not large enough. I know they're starting to grow, but and there are other little pockets of things that happen, like we have galleries that give presence to our Indian heritage and things like that. I would love to see more focus, because like you said, the city is magical. It has a lot to offer, but you as an artist and those ancestors who came before you brought so much here. I would like to see it more available to teach our youth, to teach more of our community, to teach more of all of our culture. You know, being a local here, grown up here, he's raised here. I didn't get the full on like I wanted to, and I'm a little disgruntled about that. You know, I'm a little disgruntled that I didn't get to know the city in the way that you experienced from the art and culture world coming into the space. So knowing you and what you're doing, telling the story, the history, the names you're giving to things, and we're going to get into that, y'all, because this man here is amazing. His brain and the way he's developed his artwork and the way he wants to teach about culture is amazing. And I really want you to taste that. I really want you to get a big picture of that and not put it in a box, because it's bringing towards something that I feel I should have had. And that's why I wanted you part of this program. With Breaking Bread with him, we learn so much about how he can speak to our youth and growing and inspiring them to not only do their artwork, but to be self-secured in who they are as a person, not in just in their skin, but all over as a person. So I just want to congratulate you for that, and speaks to that.
Thank you. I will say this. One of the things that motivates me is that, you know, I was one of those kids who grew up in rural Mississippi. I didn't know that eggs could be white because I grew up with my grandparents, and we had our own chicken coops. We had our own, you know, as we call them, hogs. We made our own chitlins.
Ooh.
I didn't eat it because it was too gummy for me as a kid. I'm a person about texture when I eat, so that texture just didn't fit. But I mean,
smell didn't fit for me. I'm like, whoa.
You know, it's just being from a place where, you know, you're surrounded by people who had to always find creative ways of getting things done.
Yes.
You know, like I remember, you know, growing up and we didn't have like a lot of, I didn't know it was called poor or poverty. I just thought everybody lived like that. Where I'm from, everybody had trailers, or the houses they will make by combining a house with a trailer, being creative. You know, and how the children out there, because I always had idle minds, but we had so much material, raw material, wood, metal, nails, or, you know, things that people would tell other kids from the city to be step away from. Like we were like building shacks and stuff at like 10, 8, like in the woods and trees. So it's like, you know, we were doing things, and it's like, I've always been one of those kids where I've always asked why, you know, and no answer ever sufficed. So I'm like, okay, cool. And when I reached the age to where I moved to the city with my mom and lived with her, I was then educated on where I came from a little bit.
Yeah.
And it was more the rough edges that I had developed living in rural Mississippi were kind of shaved down a little bit by the education system. And I guess everything was placed in context as far as the history, what happened to people that looked like me, because even in rural Mississippi, we didn't really interact with white people that much. We only saw them maybe, I know growing up, I only saw them maybe once or twice a year.
Wow.
Because we existed in pockets of community. And those communities were, you know, they were self-reliable. Like we grew our own foods, and, you know, the only time we needed to go to a grocery store was like when we went to Walmart or somewhere, you know, in town, and we had to get cleaning supplies, because everything that we were raised with were things that were birthed out of having to be creative. And so going, you know, being placed into the education system in a city, which is Jackson, I would say I was grateful enough to be introduced to art, specifically writing, because I used to want to be a writer. I dreamed about it. I wanted to be it. I love how, you know, the English language is very ambiguous. You can use it to tell a story. You can use it to evoke emotion. and studying, being a student of history, and it's like being given educators who were first and foremost black women who looked like me, who sounded like me, who talked like the people in my family, who taught me to present the best parts of myself, and also introduced me to formal works of literature. Elaine Locke, Langston Hughes, Sylvia Plath. Not just black people, but just all creatives.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, well, I'm taking that from the way I grew up and comparing that, and pairing that with my education. And some people would say I guess the word is autodidact, a self-educated person.
Hello.
Like I've always been.
That? Say that word again.
I think it's autodidact.
Ooh, we're gonna look it up.
And that's someone who's highly self-educated or some stuff like that. And so I was like, okay, I'm interested in writing, and just so happened, and I have to include this because this is where all of this started. I was in I had signed up for the IB program, which is International Baccalaureate. And it's a program there's a pre-college program that said it's hard enough to count as a freshman year at Harvard. So I missed the summer program because we moved that summer. Mm-hmm. So I didn't get the notice to come to the program, during the summer to prep us for it in the 9th grade. And when I got it there on the first day of school, all these kids already knew each other. They had already chosen their classes. So I was able to get into the other classes, but one of the classes I was just thrown into because I couldn't get anything else was an art class. I was like, I don't want to do this. I want to write. I want all the writing classes.
Yeah.
And the lady who taught that class was a middle-aged white European lady from like England, and she had the most delicate accent. And I was like, oh, she sounds like the people from England. It was giving me a chance to find someone I can work under and copy the accent. And I was like, just eating it up. But she literally.
To do that as a kid.
Yeah, and I just being in a place where, even as a black kid in Mississippi, saying that it was more interesting to me to be someone else as opposed to what I, already was. I always wanted to be something that I deemed bigger than black and whatever, because I was from a place where it's like we weren't celebrated, so I didn't know anything else. And so the first assignment she gave us, she said, okay, we're going to focus on making African masks, using plaster and burlap. And I'm like, what? Mm-hmm. Like,
it's something new.
Yeah, I'm like,
it's 9th grade. Mm-hmm.
I'm like, I don't want to hear nothing about no Africa. I want to hear something about Europe and all this stuff like that. And she started, and it's ironic, in Mississippi, a white woman from Europe introducing this black kid from rural Mississippi to his own culture. Or where he come from, and it's like that whole process of it was messy. My mask looked messy and raggedy as hell, but that whole process of taking material into my hand and being given a new language to learn, and finally all those things that I wanted to put into words, I was able to put in physical form, and it stayed. You could see all of it at once. It didn't require you turning pages and going, experiencing the up and down emotions, and themes and, all this stuff like that. And I was like,
beautiful the way you just put that.
I literally had something that I could mold with my own hands, get messy with it and wipe away the crumbs of the plaster. Like all of that informs you as an artist. Like the material will inspire you. That's why I always push for black artists. Yes, painting is fine, and I see a lot of black artists, focusing on painting. I'm not saying there aren't any black sculptors out there. There obviously are. It's just that, my travels in life up until this point has not allowed me to interact with a lot of them. So majority of the artists that I see on Instagram, the majority of the artists I see on Twitter, majority of the artists I've seen at art shows and art fairs like Art Basel Miami, and even in New Orleans, like I don't really know any black sculptors.
I don't either.
Do you?
Know any? Do you know any?
Sculptures? No.
Community members, if y'all know any black sculptors, let us know. Hit us up.
And that's the thing. Everybody's doing painting, and it has its place. It does. But, that process of molding something with your hands and then coming from a place like rural Mississippi where we were used to building things with our hands, it kind of spoke back to my beginnings, building clubhouses, making our own slingshot guns with bottle caps. And so it's like something, I can literally put my hands on and see and feel and create, in a way that painting won't allow. Because even with painting, you're dipping brush in cleaner so you don't mix things. And if you mix too many colors, it ends up looking muddy. And then you have to have a technical understanding of the material. You have the technical understanding of color mixing theory, proportions, all this and that. Where it's like there's a lot that goes into that kind of forces the editing of those natural thoughts and natural, moments of inspiration. You're editing that in real time because you're thinking, okay, I can do this or I can't do this. Whereas with sculpting, like you can do that in real time. You can make a curve here, you can make an indentation here, and there's no delay between you and execution. Like literally, you can like just go at it as you're doing it. And with painting, you have to let layers dry in between. So in between layers drying, so that your paints don't be muddy, you're losing,
that energy.
You're losing. You're tapping out of that flow. You're pausing. That flow, and it's not as fluid. The art making process is not as fluid. I can't say that for everybody. I can only say that for me.
Right.
Like I've probably trying to paint. I've probably forgotten more ideas than I can remember to put down on paper, but I do it because the painting, it does inform the sculpture.
It tells many stories. I mean, I've identified with a lot of your artwork, and I think it's phenomenal, especially this piece over here, which I think you guys can see a little bit of. We'll do a little showing of that a little bit later. But if you want to talk about these two pieces that we have right here, you're welcome to do so.
Yeah, I'll get on those. But I do want to, continue like what we were talking about earlier, where it was like, how did I get to the process of painting and the message I want to tell?
Absolutely.
And for me, I was like, okay, well, going back to what I said, if I had a choice, I wouldn't have been an artist because it comes with so much responsibility. And for me, it's because I love history. I love the history of our people. I love the history of everyone because it's not just segmented. Everything was going on at the same time for different parts of the world. So all that informs who we are and who we become. And one of the things I wanted to do is just tell those stories that we don't hear much about using art. We always talk about our history as far as slavery in this country, but we forget there were millions of slaves who died on the way here. What are their stories? What did that look like when they were being thrown off the ships? What did it look like when those sharks were following some of those ships, waiting for, the food to be thrown overboard? What did it look like, when people were committing suicide? Those stories. Or, for example, the piece we're working on right here, I was telling you that this is dedicated to those African Americans who escaped slavery and went to Canada. When we tell the whole civil rights struggle and going back from the civil rights struggle, going all the way back to slavery, we forget about our cousins who actually went to Canada. We don't include them in our conversations. The cousins and family members who fled to Mexico, we don't include them in our conversations. So it's like,
South America.
Yeah, all of that. So it's like, I want to, use art to tell those stories and to cement those stories because as we known recently, if you put it in a book, it could be, written away. There could be laws put in place so that, you can't teach that. And again, it goes back to using the ambiguity of the English language to strike fear in people and force them to vote in a way that washes all that away. And they label it as critical race theory. It's the truth. It's the truth. And a lot of people don't know that, during the civil rights, struggle and before that, when there was a great migration happening, blacks were leaving the South and taking their skills with them to the North.
Correct.
And they don't know that there are stories of white mobs trying to stop the trains and buses from leaving because they were losing their maids. They were losing their babysitters. They were losing their cooks. They were losing their skilled workers. Where are those stories? So it's like, that's what the art does. Though it's not so much I'm thinking about art all the time. I'm not. Those voices of those people literally won't let me sleep at night. Literally, I can be listening to a conversation, a keyword, and I'm not even ear hustling. A keyword would just hit my ear, and I'm like, okay, where's my sketchbook? Got to get it down. Got to do a series on this. That's the way it happens. I don't control it. It just comes at me. And so getting to this piece was dedicated to, those, African Americans who had to escape, north. Well, not only north, but leave the country, because I think at some point, I think the late 1700s, mid to late 1700s, the fugitive law was enacted. And so now you could go there and literally go up north and capture or kidnap, as we saw in 12 Years a Slave.
Bring them back to
Bring them back. So it's like they had to go further north, and that's why you have the snow representing, the crossing over to Canada. And this particular figure is actually a I wouldn't say a goddess, but I guess people will interpret her as a goddess. But she's an energy that led the way. She was very swift. She was very intelligent. She would be considered a double agent of some sorts. Yeah. She was able to morph, and take on like the characteristics of who she needed to take on in order to blend in. And the scars on her back, represent, of course, the scars from slavery. But she also was very highly intelligent, and her whole thing was her existence, was there because whenever a black person came up on her seeking refuge, she would guide them through the woods and through those places getting to the north, probably even further. But one of the things that happened is that, during slavery, there were people who were traders. There were people who looked like us who were sent in, to kind of, find out where we were going, where we were going to be, the plans and stuff like that. So I wanted to play on that whole story, that whole ideology that all skin folk and kinfolk, and how, that was people who looked like us were used as weapons against us. So whenever she turned around, she would look into your face, and, if this thing appeared, it's almost like that lizard from a Jurassic Park, where it's defending itself, it just pops out. Yeah. Some people may remember the thing that Jeepers Creepers had when he's getting ready to eat people or something like that. Mm-hmm. So it's like this thing pops out and it scares away those black people who were traitors. Yeah. And if you were a traitor, you looked at the scars on her back, you would only see scars. But if you were really someone looking for refuge and escaping, the scars would turn into a map, letting you know what your next destination would be. Oh, wow. And
she's fascinating. She's beautiful. I'm drawn to this whole thing. I mean, initially when you first started talking about it, of course, the first figure that comes to our mind is Harriet Tubman, and how she was viewed as the guide through the Underground Railroad. But I even see that being her inner spirit, like something that called not only Harriet Tubman, but all people who did this.
There are many people who did this.
Who were brave enough to.
Moses, Harriet Tubman, and it's like this figure is tapping into that energy, because if you think about it, everything I used to describe this energy, who does that remind you of? Harriet Tubman. She was known to be, they considered her to be a spy. She was very, very quick with it. Like you weren't pulling the one over on her. Like, she knew. Yeah. And she had the discernment.
A spy, a traitor.
Yeah, like so that would represent. Yeah. And that's just what I want to do. And my use of color is very intentional. Like I said before, I described to you, when you first met, that, I will always work in a color red, white, and blue, with probably accents of gold and accents of white here and there. Not deviating from those colors, because I feel like those colors are, just as much ours as anybody else. We've been here since the beginning, and so, it's not appropriating, something if we help build it. But also those colors represent.
You can say that a lot louder than that. It is not appropriating.
It is not appropriating something if you help build it.
Yes.
But the thing is, those colors, can be imbued with so many, different meanings because of what we've gone through. The red could obviously represent blood, in lineage. The blue could represent the traveling across the Atlantic Ocean. As I told you, I was like, it could represent the name, the children of the Middle Passage. The gold, of course, comes from and this is a very important part, wherever you see my work, there will always be some accent of gold. And it goes from this notion, I guess, this idea, there's me ear hustling again. Yeah. I think in Japan it is, where if some precious dishes are broken, they will use gold to mend those dishes back together, filling in some of those pieces of the dish that were missing. So I was like, why not take that ideology and apply it to how I create art? Wherever you see gold in my artwork, that represents culture that was lost, but we filled it in with something even better. Or not necessarily better in most cases, but something that's different, that makes our transition through life very easy. Almost kind of like filling in the potholes in a street,
Yeah.
No pun intended. filling in the potholes with gold, you know, and
Let's fill them with gold, New Orleans. Let's go to our potholes and fill them with gold.
yeah, and like, you know, just using that and
We never had another pothole, probably.
I know, right? But yeah, it's just getting to that space where it's like I'm using the artwork to tell a truth
Yeah.
and the truth, and just doing it in a way to where the art looks, you know, different visually than what people are accustomed to. And a lot of people were asking, you know, why don't you, you know, do realism? And for me, like, no offense to anybody who does realism, but for me, it's like it was just never visually interesting.
Right.
You know, I've done it. I have the work to prove it that I can do it. It's just that, you know, it doesn't allow me to be free because you worrying about technicals, you know, proportions and all this other stuff. But the approach I've taken to my artwork is if I'm going to be telling our stories, what would the artwork look like if someone gave black people who had no training art a lot of art materials with no training and say, okay, just tell your stories. It would look like them splashing their hands inside of paint and just wiping it across whatever material they have at the time.
Yeah.
It would look like some of the artwork would look like it was done by a child or someone who just wasn't trained formally or according to the European.
What type of training? Yes.
Yeah, according to European standards, because a lot of our artwork is based on European ideas and standards of beauty. You know, and it's like, but if you look at indigenous art, I'm talking about the Native Americans, you know, Africans, you know, Polynesians. Their art is refined in a way that was pleasing to them. That came natural to them. You know, there's going to be exaggeration. There's going to be elongated arms, you know, long necks. You know, the quarter horse, I think they call it, where the lower part of the body is big and built like a horse almost.
Yeah.
Like, you know, when I was studying anatomy formally in school, like everything we learned as far as drawing the human body was based off European men and women. You know, we even had live models to come into the classroom, and those models were European men and women, nude. So it's like I learned to do everything according to their body proportions, you know, and it wasn't until I started delving into like, okay, let me try to, in my best way, divorce myself from all of that and look at things as they are, you know, as it pertains to people who look like me, who are built like me. And so that means adopting the way those indigenous cultures view things. You know, like, I was like, okay, so what kind of approach would I take? And of course, me having African mask, you know, all over my wall here in my home, like, you know, that was the first start. Like, that was the first place I started. I was like, okay, let me look at the forms. Let's look at how they exaggerated the nose, the lips, you know, to convey a certain, you know, idea. And so I know one piece of my work, you're going to show it later on, is the piece dedicated to victims of lynching. And the first thing you notice is that it looks abstract and the neck is elongated. And so you wouldn't get that in realism.
Right.
Like, realism is all about
painting
and doing exactly what you see.
proportioned.
And some people take liberties and adding, you know, may change the color or change the shape of something, you know, within the painting as far as like how it's positioned and composition. But it doesn't, you know, allow you to be free. And some people will say, if you don't like realism, you can go to abstract, you know, art. Well, you know, this is what I do. It's the closest I can come.
Well, let me ask you this, because I want to I want to rewind back to the story of your 9th grade year and your introduction to art and stuff like that. When we find our community as it is today, do you feel or do you think that there should be some changes and modifications of where art and culture is infused in public school systems in our community?
Yes, most definitely. Because, like I said, when I first got into art via sculpture, making those African masks, I was given a new language that I learned to speak and express myself through that may not come across well as a speaker, because I was never great at speaking. I was never great. Well, it comes to trial and error.
Yeah.
But I was never good at speaking. I had so much anxiety about speaking in front of people. And so I was like, okay, well, I can do this through art. I can pour everything I wanted to say, everything I want to talk about, everything I want to, express, you know, I can do it through this new language, which was art. And so I think that, you know, for me personally, I think that if you put clay in front of a black child, and I'm very specific in saying that, well, any child, but to stay on topic with the conversation, like a black child, I've done it with my nephews. They have created some of the most amazing pieces. Now, anybody else would be like, oh, I don't understand it, but you gotta watch them during that process of making. They become so focused and so centered. You can hear a pin drop. At least I could have heard a pin drop. You know, as my grandma said, you could hear a mouse piss on cotton.
Yeah,
you know, like I was like, what the hell? And it's like, I would watch them get up, you know, maybe go to the bathroom, go to the fridge, grab something to eat, and come right back. And that lasted maybe about a good 4 or 5 hours.
Wow.
And it's just something about that creative process. And it's like, wow. And it wasn't complete silence in the entire time. What I did notice is that the things they talked about while they were sculpting, like they were literally talking to each other across the room as they're molding things like, you remember that thing we did the other day? You know, in the thickest country accents, like, you know, and they were like, yeah, and then they start roasting each other, you know, like we do when things are too quiet. But to see them, you know, to move through, you know, problem solving in that way, when something didn't work out, they were like, I hate this. And I was like, no, you made a mistake, or what you considered a mistake, just work around it. What would you do different? You know, they were like, well, I would do this and that, you know, and it really teaches them in real time.
Yeah, I'm hearing that. I'm hearing thought. I'm hearing focus. I'm hearing working through aggression, you know, things like that, that I find that in our community, our young people don't have the tools to do. I had a conversation with a friend of mine, and we were talking about how we weren't taught really to maintain our emotions or even how to express them so much until we were much older. So not giving a school the responsibility to do this. However, if you were in a school and you had sculpting class to go to and you were having some issues at home and you wanted to express something, you would be able to do that, so to speak, in that classroom. You know, I know certain schools, they have dance, they have cheerleading and all these things that are after school, but are they really allowing a teaching process of expression to know how to express yourself through different measures? I mean, for you in the sculpting area, I'm just now seeing and feeling a void that in this city, this magic city that we live in, could possibly provide.
Yeah, because I will tell you this, in doing sculpture, and this is one thing I appreciate about the IB program that I was in, and doing anything we did, I thought this was just stupid at the time, but as I got older, it really informed how I even approach people. Before we did anything, the teachers required us to look at who the author was. We studied the author. Like, okay, when I got introduced to the Great Gatsby book, before we even read that book, we had to do a week where we studied the author, like his biography and all this. I'm like, what does it have to do with anything? And my teacher told me, well, how he lived his life influenced the work that he created at that time. What was going on in history influenced how he, you know, viewed things at that time. So you can't study the work without studying who it came from and whatever biases they may inject into that work. And so you have to do your research when you're approaching anything. Before you even pick up the first, you know, piece of raw material, you have to research and you have to do it with intention. And so what sculpture did for me, or just art in general, the idea would come, you know, at speed of light. But then because I have to figure out what I'm going to say or what I want to say, I have to study. Like I have to go look up. If I'm going to talk about these things, I better know what I'm talking about, you know, because it has to be intentional. Your choice of color has to be intentional, you know. And some people are like, well, wouldn't that go against, you know, the freedom and flow that you talk about, you know, you want to do? Well, yes and no.
I was saying the same thing in my head. Like, yes and no.
Yeah, it's a dance that you learn to do.
Right.
And if you prepare yourself, by doing the proper research beforehand and not working out the kinks of what you want to say in your sketchbook, I'm not going to say if you don't do it. If you do all those necessary things, if you do the research and you work out, you know, the type of story you want to tell in your sketchbook, then you just shoot it out into the universe, or, you know, or whatever you do, whatever ritual you have, you shoot it out into the universe and just let it go. And then all of that research and everything is going to show up during those bursts of inspiration while you're creating. It's going to come out as a hunch. It's going to come out as a no, take this arm off and elongate the other. You don't know why you're doing it in real time, but there's a consciousness behind you that's operating, like the eternal eye or something, or the watcher of our lives that exist in us. Like it's telling me, like, take the arm off. I don't know. I don't question it. It's telling me elongate the arm, elongate the neck, turn the head to this degree, or don't do this anymore. Put that color down and pick this color up. And it comes out as a hunch. But what that really is, I think, is that it's you as an artist creating this machine, this big blender, and all the research and preparation work is going into that blender. And right when you pick up the first piece of material, you press the start button and don't know what's going to happen. And it's like somebody is taking the top off that blender. They press the stop button, they're taking the top off that blender, and they're extracting each ingredient that you put in and using it to make a decision for you as an artist. I don't know where it comes from. Some people say it's God. Some people say it's energy. I say sometimes it's my ancestors whispering in my ear. It's most definitely something that happens during that process, but it goes back to preparing, the story, what you want to say first and foremost. And then just letting go, releasing yourself from it, and then pick up your materials. And letting it come out in hunches and learning to trust it, that gut instinct.
First brain.
Yeah. And because it will guide you. It will guide you.
Yeah.
And for me, it goes back again, like that's why with doing realism and doing those fine pieces of artwork, I don't have that, at least for me, I can't say that for everybody, but for me, it's limiting. I don't have that freedom to go and experiment. It's just, what I've learned along the way to inform the practice and going back to it being used in the education system to build, patience. Like through art and sculpture, I had to learn patience. I had to learn to trust myself. I had to learn to feed my machine source material.
I want you to repeat that. You had to do what?
I had to learn patience. I had to learn to trust myself. I had to learn to feed my machine that I create that will inform me. I had to learn to feed it with research. I had to learn, constantly question, why am I doing what I'm doing? I had to become disciplined. So it taught me all those things, and it's still teaching me those things. It taught me how to, take care of my mental health first, because you can lose yourself in the process and doubt yourself a lot.
Sounds like we need just as many art studios and things as we have like karate dojos, because everything that you're talking about, they actually preach in karate as well. It's just a different way of expressing.
Now, on the flip side, it does make you have an ego, because you have those moments where you're like, I call it the Kanye West moment, the first Kanye West moment, the first Kanye, where you're like, I'm the greatest alive, I'm the greatest, and all that stuff like that. And then on the flip side, when things don't work out, you go, why am I doing this? What is the purpose of all this? Why am I subjecting myself to this kind of self-scrutiny, And then it requires you to go back and say, well, I'm this and I'm that, I done had such and such years of training. I done been through, all this. They ain't got nothing on me. I'm bringing that fire. Ain't nobody ever did nothing like this before.
All right, Muhammad Ali.
But you have to learn it. We all think that. Anybody who's ever created anything.
You should have that Muhammad Ali moment, the Kanye West moments. You should have those.
But what that also teaches you is how to be humble. Because you will always, as an artist, as a creative, whether you're a dancer, actor, whatever, you will always run into somebody who's better than you.
Always. Or just different. Not necessarily just better.
Well, not let me not say better, just who's more, whatever more is. They have more training, they have more technical skills, they push themselves more, and it's like, you will always run into other creators who are just what you're not.
I would say have more devotion to their work or to their craft or to their talent. I would probably preface it by that, because I think if you put 100% or just dive in and put your best in, which I tell my children, my daughters, put your best into that, and there's no other question to that. That is your best. That's what you want to give. There's no comparison your best to somebody else's best. You put as much energy into it as they did. You know what I'm saying?
Well, and I will even say this. I will even counter that, like by saying that, let me use myself as an example.
Yeah.
being away from it from 8 years when I decided to get back into it. Now, those 8 years, I did watch other artists. I watched artists explode on social media. And there were points where I was like, oh my God, they did that amazing. I could never think of that. And what that did was push me to get back into the lab, get back into, what I wanted to do. Now, throughout those 8 years, I didn't create art, but again, may have jot down a note here or jot down a note there. Okay, it would be nice to try this one day, but never doing anything with it. And it's like when I got back into the art, a couple of months ago, I was thinking about all the artists on Instagram. I've seen all the artists on social media, some whose work is just phenomenal and some whose work is just mediocre. You can tell they're churning out the same pictures of celebrities over and over again. And those artists, you would see on their pages, you would see works of Tupac. They will always paint Tupac, paint Nipsey Hussle, paint Biggie, paint Jay-Z's, paint the Beyoncés, and that's fine. That has its place, but they're not pushing any boundaries. They mastered the materials, they mastered technique. But I asked myself, if that same artist was painting a picture of Harriet Tubman with a rifle in her hand pointed at another black person, because that did happen, what would that look like? What would happen if you created a whole canon of African American gods? What would happen if you take that same technique you've perfected, painting celebrities and waiting outside of the venue so you can have a picture taken with them holding your artwork? Like, what would happen if you took that same energy? If you took that same energy and you gave illustration to all those stories that exist in New Orleans, all those stories that exist in Mississippi, Georgia, even if you're not someone who say, I don't want to paint that trauma art, you don't have to. No. You could paint art that's showing like the beauty of our culture. Because right now
we have so many of it.
We have so much of it.
So much of it. And you don't get to view it.
And not saying there aren't artists out there who are doing that, but it's just so much work that needs to be created. We don't really have the luxury like everybody else to paint stuff by fly of night. Kerry James Marshall said it best. He was like, he could do all those other things, that other people are doing, but he wants to push the limit. And he was like, we can do what other people are doing as far as abstract art and creating the crazy shit. But with us, specifically African Americans, there has been so much artwork that has been created that left us out. There is so much that needs to be created. I'm talking about going all the way back to the 1700s and stuff like that tells that we were here since the beginning. Because if you walk into those museums, some of those, highfalutin museums, you don't see many images of us in those places.
No, it's one little corner. And I visited D.C. And when I was in D.C., I made a determination every time I went, I wanted to go visit every museum. I wanted to go see how our culture was infused in what these major museums have, the stories that they were telling, and it was good, but then slightly disappointing at the same time, because what I was looking for wasn't fulfilled. And then when I went to the African American Museum, the big one that they just built, and that story, walking from the bottom all the way to the top and taking all day to do that, that was, surreal. That was a walkthrough time that I wasn't prepared to have, just learning as much as I learned. And I went through the emotion of knowing that and feeling good about it. And at the same time, like, why didn't I know this earlier? Why was I a fourth grader wondering where black people were? Why was this not taught early in my life? I took my kahunas and I even approached my parents about, why didn't you teach me these things? Why weren't you taught me these? Why weren't you my teacher and teaching me about my culture and heritage? Tell me about you and your life. I make it a good point to know my children, to know where they came from and what influence our ancestors had on who they become today, who and where they will be coming in the future. And I think that's so important with even our foster youth. This is where my passion comes in at all the time. I will never forget about them, that they don't have the luxury of knowing from parents where they came from because they don't have parents to speak on. Most of them have lost their family through no fault of their own. They're just lost right now. They're not connected. They don't have the foundation to where they can grow and know who they are. I think that we do a disservice by not putting more out there what you're talking about. We need to, just out in plain sight. Another story, I'm in Chicago just walking around and I'm learning so much about the city and people and myself along that journey. And I just felt like we should be able to do that anywhere, because Black people, Africans, Indians, whatever, we're everywhere. I shouldn't have to go, I should be able to walk down my street and know a little bit about who I am. You know, just certain spaces, they should have that. That's what I believe.
It's funny that you say that, because one of the things that, you know, that made me pick up, you know, art, you know, again, is I went through this audiobook that I purchased. It was called The New Negro, The Life of Alain Locke. Not The New Negro, the book that he actually put out in the 20s. It was a historian who went back and studied his life, read his private notes, letters, and everything. And it pretty much went over his life. And one of the things that stuck out, he said, is that, you know, Alain Locke, you know, when he went to Europe, his travels to Europe, he fell in love with Europe, because no matter where you went in Europe, there was always art, sculptures, statues,
Everywhere,
you know,
right?
everything illustrating their
Egypt.
history. You know, he was like, there, you know, you could be in some parts of Europe and not realize you're in a completely different part, because there's an aesthetic that Europe has where those same sculptures and type of paintings that you see in Italy, you would see in Greece. And you would see some of those same types of statues and that style all around England, around Paris, of course. So there's an aesthetic wherever you go. You cannot go anywhere in Europe without seeing some sort of European art, whether it's in their cathedrals, inside the cathedrals, outside, you know, their religious, you know, centers of worship, their cultural centers. It's always there. But you walking around in America, honestly, you wouldn't even know that Black people were here, or has been here since the beginning. There are no sculptures to Ruby Bridges.
Right.
She's still alive. She is literally still alive. Where are the sculptures dedicated to the day she, you know, had to do that? Or the counter sit-ins. Unless you literally force yourself to pick up a book, you wouldn't see any of that anywhere, except during the month of February, where there were a lot of specials coming on and, you know, all this like that. But you wouldn't see any of that anywhere. It's some artists, some European artists, at least I know the older ones that I've studied, they were like, you know, America it's a black hole.
This United States.
Yeah.
Well, you know, you're right about the black hole, especially when you talk about the black hole, you talk about Tulsa, where they just blew it up. You know, anything that we were trying to prove, they blew it up. They literally burned it down.
Well,
anything that we did, our ancestors put out there to build up our heritage and assets and things like that as a community was torn down.
Well, I will say this. When I say black hole, I'm talking about, you know, like, as far as like there being one aesthetic that the entire country follows and fall under.
Yeah.
Now, when you say black hole in terms of that, that's a whole different subject that, go ahead, we're going to walk right into it.
No, we not. No, we not. No, we not.
No, the thing is,
because I really want to focus on what you're doing and how we're going to do
that. But that informs it. Like, for me, like, those stories, those types of stories is what I want to show. And I know when I finally get to the whole, you know, Tulsa, you know, Oklahoma thing,
Elaine,
you know, I'm going to have to not only include Tulsa. You know, there's incidents that happen in Mississippi. There are incidents that happen in Alabama. There are incidents that happen in other parts of the South. So I want to do a whole dedication, like Rosewood, like that. Like, I want to show that. So then it goes back to, as an artist, and this is where I say art should be used as a tool for teaching, especially our children, because you have to do the research if you're going to do the work.
Correct.
And so now you have to understand, how do I step back objectively? Yes, I'm a black artist. First and foremost, I'm black. So how do I separate myself from that and step back and look at it as a visual scientist? If I always tell myself, if I'm going to create something, I have to first do the research, think about how I'm going to approach it, and then remove myself from it so I don't bring my own personal biases in it. Mm-hmm. I'm reporting it as it happened.
Correct. Mm-hmm.
And so I was like, okay, well, if an alien, I have to go through this whole process, which is stupid, but that we have to do this, but you want to do it right. I say, okay, if I'm an alien and I'm sitting here to be a scientist and study like what I'm researching happened, and also what I'm observing in real time, what would that look like? You know, if I was to tell the story,
right,
and not infusing my own biases, and you know, there are some times where I can't do that. my experience won't let me do that. It's like, no, you are a black person. You put your biases in this. But it's like, you got to let them know what happened. But I'm very careful learning how to do that when I'm telling the stories of someone else. Like, if I'm telling the story of Harriet Tubman, if I'm telling the story of Elaine Locke or Langston Hughes or Zernie Hurston or any of our black great giants, like, I have to do it in a way where it's like I'm not infusing all that I've gone through, as a black millennial with what these people went through as part of the silent generation or baby boomers in their time. So it's like I try to, remove myself and just tell a real, well-rounded story. So
Did you
that
hear? I'm sorry to interrupt, but did you hear in New York? And I think New York is a really a good blueprint for what. Well, in DC too much, but New York, the hip hop museum that they're finally putting in the Bronx. Why are you making that face? I think that's amazing. I love the fact that they're going to do that. It's about time. Why would they not have a space where you can learn about hip hop history?
cut.
And then look, this generation right here. I mean, he's that generation. Because I think they don't get enough. I mean, what would you say?
Let me say this. And let me
Go
explain my whole, shady little, things I'm doing.
Uh-huh.
There's a whole thing
Edit
going
that
on.
out.
There's a whole thing going on online right now. It's specifically Twitter, where Latinos are claiming that they helped create hip hop.
Huh? Oh, sorry. That's new to me.
Yeah, it's really big.
Latinos are claiming
Latinos from New York are claiming that
they are the founders of hip
that
hop.
they 50% created hip hop.
50% created hip hop.
And I know it's kind of crazy and kind of immature
Yeah,
in school, like to
that's-
even be following this stuff. But the conversation online. This is me observing. Let me not put my own, but from what I saw, I just logged on one day. Saw this conversation that black people were having with other black people from the north, black Southern peoples and black Northern people, and it was based on a clip that somebody posted where Fat Joe and Busta Rhymes are standing on stage, and Busta Rhymes says, "Cut the music" or some shit like that, and he was like, hip hop would not be here if it wasn't for the Latinos or Dominicans and all that stuff like that. Busta Rhymes says this. Then when that happened, black people start quoting, and coming with the receipts in the comment section. And Fat Joe then responded with another video saying, "Y'all crazy, fuck what everybody." I'm paraphrasing. He was like, "Fuck what everybody else say." We know, and he started naming names of people, but who Latinos who he credit as being
Influenced?
part, no, not just influenced, part creator of hip hop, music. And the funny thing about it, people start going in the comment section, posting interviews from that exact Latino person who's still alive, saying, "No, I saw what the black kids were doing, up, wherever the neighborhood was, and I was going to their parties and watching them, and, I would go back to my communities, and, Latinos would be like, why are you hanging with that, listening to that Jungle Bunny music?" He was like, Latinos weren't behind it at first, and it was already there. Now, and then they was like, they start quoting like Crush Groove and all this stuff like that, those movies, saying you can see Latinos in the movie doing such and such. You can see them there, but that doesn't mean they originated at. So they're like, yeah, we originated. It came from, then they start pulling in the other culture. It came from the Jamaicans and blah, blah, blah. Grandmaster Flash and all that. I understand. Yes, that did. But people started posting videos from the early 1900s of black swing dancers, and buck dancing and all that like that. The exact movements these break dancers do when they're about to get ready, get on the floor and do the twists and turns and flips. They were doing it in like the
early
96, something like that. They started posting videos. I'm like, I didn't even know this existed. Then I'm pretty sure you're familiar with that one clip where they showed the gospel quartet in the 30s, 40s singing, and one of them talking real fast like he's rapping.
Yeah.
They was like, that came from that. Like, so there's a, how
no,
are you
it
saying?
can't come from that per se, but go ahead.
Well, they was like, it came from that, and some people like, or that it influenced, it evolved into that. So, and one thing
I would say that. I would agree with that
one thing somebody said, and that was really interesting to me. They was like, well, hip hop, we're going to let them have that up there, whatever they're saying, because there was such a melting pot up there, and anybody from there, they will tell you or say or make the claim that backs up what Busta Rhymes and, Fat Joe says. However, you had the Southerners who were fighting and saying, no, hip hop, whatever, has its roots in both gospel and blues. And, there was a great migration that happened there creatively from the South that informed all of that, And the guy was like, well, you know what? We'll let y'all have hip hop. But thank God that you guys went down here in the South. He said, because we know, that if you try to come down here and say you created gospel music and blues, there's no fucking way that's going to fly. Like, we all know the truth. So it's like, it's a whole debate going on. And I was like, well, let me take my feelings out of it. I don't know. I wasn't there.
I wasn't there either, but I think, that's the point of the artwork. That's the point of...
That is why you need these sculptures so people can't come in and say this happened this way and that didn't happen. Because if the artists, I'm not saying the artists weren't doing their job or whatever back then, because you have Jean-Michel Basquiat, other artists who, graffiti work was happening at the same time.
Yeah.
But it's like, if you are not specific about your people, where they come from and their contributions, anybody could come along and say, it happened this way. And what's going on with the whole hip hop thing is no different than what's happened in Texas with the critical race thing right there and taken out of school. If you don't have these cultural relics in place that were very intentionally created, like, anybody can come along and say, we don't want that part of history told, or it didn't happen that way, or this is how it happened.
Right. And I agree with you 100%. I think that's why we need what you do as far as sculpting. I mean, we still have the Great Pyramids. We still have these big storytellers.
And you can't deny them because it's there.
Yeah, it's there. And it's right there in front of your face. What are you going to do? Say, oh, no, So that's what's important to me. And that's what I think that you bring to the atmosphere of our community. I mean, I really want to get this young perspective too. If we want to switch to your thought process, are you ready to chime in?
No, y'all doing great right now.
No, we are, but I'm just saying we're one generation, but I've talked a lot about, what y'all were missing out on, and I don't want you to not speak on that.
No, everything y'all saying is great.
Well, I mean, what do you think when you see the work or the process, is it something that you feel like you connect with?
With the process?
Yeah, just the work in the process or just the art in general,
Well, yeah, after you get the explanation of the actual work and going to your art pieces, like, okay, you could see pieces together, like, okay, how this relates. So the part that I was focusing on and thinking about, which is the part that, okay, one, we talk about how your sculpture and your painting, this one was Harriet Tubman, and how you look at her scars, it's a roadmap from, if you look at it from people just trying to escape, but also the scars could represent just with the, I forgot this called, he said, Komodo dragon. But
we're here?
Yeah, and like with that, I forgot it was called, but with that and being places, it could scare people the traders, black traders, it scared people away. So understand that, how to understand art, that was very interesting. And then when you said actually being a visual scientist, I was like, okay, so visual scientist, that's very important. And I was like, okay, but when you start saying you want to tell the story or tell the narrative, so I was like, so you're a visual scientist, which I like how you put it, but also you're a journalist, because if you don't have that art, then you can't tell the story. And saying like, okay, why we need sculptures, because I see pieces of art around the city in New Orleans, which is great for me. It's fun to look at. You want to know the story behind the art and the creative process behind it, which I love how you describe. But it's saying another perspective or a reason why it needs to be there. So when you said that, I think about kind of like Wall Street in New York. So they got that big old bull and what that represents and how that, this is Wall Street, how it's been built the capitalism of America. So saying that, like, we have that art pieces to show that, hey, this is, like you said with the pyramids, this is actual art, and this is a message behind that. So it's not denying no truth that comes along with it, because people do like to twist the truth. And I think as generation come through, you don't know that because you wasn't born during those times, and then no one teaches you that in school, then you're not going to have the foundation or the knowledge to actually understand what's going on. You're just going to carry on with your life because you already got enough problems in your own life. So like you said, if you make these artworks, I think it's important. And then teaching the kids that, hey, go about your career process. Like, hey, I'm going to give you this clay. I'm gonna see what you do with it. And then let them talk among themselves, and you guide them through that process. You let them wrong, but you guide them through that process. When they get frustrated, they get annoyed. I think that part's pretty important. So everything you say is definitely interesting, and it's a new perspective on it. I think we need to start implementing that in schools and in the community. So that's how I was thinking about it. I'm just kind of looking at it and just going out from a new perspective.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that, I really wanted to do. Like, I looked at, just like you, I looked at things that were missing when I was coming up.
Yes.
Like things that, where I had to literally go and find, how my people fit into the greater scheme of things and fit into the tapestry.
Correct.
That tells the history of this country.
Absolutely.
And it's like, feeling left out, feeling like a stepchild,
Yeah.
in my own home.
You're saying exactly what I was
And
saying.
so, I will say, I've always said this to people who get the art, kudos, I love it. We want to be recognized for the work we do. But to the people who don't get it and don't understand it, I say, give it a chance. Give it more than 5 seconds. Listen to the story behind it, because one of the things that we must realize is that, you can't rip the pages. You can rip pages out of books. You can hide stories. But if it's there in your face and it's something you got to look at every day, you're looking at a piece of sculpture that has a wide nose like you, have big lips like you, deep set eyes like you, the same curves in their face and their bodies as you. It is you that you're looking at, and even if you don't know the full story behind that piece as it's out in public, it is a seed. Just by being there, it is a seed that cannot be painted over, that will lead you down a rabbit hole. If you follow the story, you want to know the history behind it, you'll know the reasons why. And I've always said this too, like, to separate myself from other artists, I was like, well, my thing is to make the process okay for me and not be so self-conscious is I'm not creating the art for my generation. I'm not creating the art for the generations that came before me, even though they are the subject matter. Like, I'm creating art for those Black children or Black artists, writers, dancers who are yet to be born. Mm-hmm. I want to leave something for them, leave some nuggets, for them. Like, I want my artwork to be inspiring. Yeah. I want it to be like fulfilling for them. I want it to be like a guidepost, to go to whenever they need inspiration for something, or to make them feel whole. I want it to be, in places of worship. Because it can act as a tool to channel certain energies. Mm-hmm. Like when you stand before a piece of art, it's you. It's you that you're looking at. When you're standing in front of a piece of art, it's you that you're looking at, because it's going to reflect back to you a certain feeling. If you look at a piece of abstract art and it's deep blue, and you find yourself standing in front of it, it is you who is pushing your energy to the art, and it's bouncing back into you amplified. You don't know why standing in front of this piece of art makes you feel the way you feel, why it's inspiring to you, or why does it make you feel sad. Those emotions are not coming from the artwork. It is you.
Yes.
So it's like, you want to do that. You want to create something, a cultural relic, specifically for my people, that reflect back to them who they are. And it goes back to that quote I heard Nina Simone say, as an artist, it is your job by hook or crook to convince your people how beautiful they are.
She was amazing.
And even Toni Morrison, I go back when I'm creating, I think about her, where the interviewer, asked her, why don't you have white people in your work, and things like that. There's hundreds of years of white people being at the center of their creative works, and like when we try to, put things in place so that we are a part of their stories, because we're a part of each other's stories. When we try to force ourselves to be, or put things in place so that we are a part of their story, we're usually given the best friend, or Spike Lee said, the magical Negro, someone who is in the white story and they give the wise advice. They're the best friend with the wise advice, or the godlike figure with the wise advice, or if we see recently in the Lord of the Rings, new show, where they forced, Black characters into those spaces, the hatred that came from that. So if you don't want us in our spaces, we'll build our own table over here, or our own rooms over here,
exactly,
and sit at our own tables. And then when we do that, it's called reverse racism.
I know.
So you don't want us a part of your stories. You don't want us a part of your communities. well, I'm going to go build my own for, my people. And it's like when I walk into museums, like I don't see myself reflected unless it's a work specifically by Carrie James Marshall, Lena Iris Victor, or somebody else, that's taking a lot of self-portraits or centering Black people around them. And it's like a lot of work that you see nowadays put out by Black artists, who are making a living for themselves. Like it's very new, it's very fresh. It has a different type of swag to it, a different type of soul to it, but it's all modern.
Yes, it's very modern.
It's very modern, and it's like, I'm not saying we're the first to put ourselves in images in such a big way, but it's definitely more visible. But then, like, I feel like you can't move into the future, or move from the present without having those images and those relics there telling the stories of everything that came before.
Absolutely.
And one of the things that people are big into now artistically is Afrofuturism.
Yeah. That's
with the pyramids and technology marrying the two. Well, I feel like personally you can't have that authentically until you go back and build an Afro mythology.
Oh, wow.
So that, you can give birth. Otherwise, it look like somebody just planted up. If Afrofuturism was a person, it looked like you turn your head or sneeze and look back up and a 23-year-old was in front of you.
Yeah.
With no history whatsoever.
Yeah.
That's there visually. But for me, it's almost like I'm cool with Afrofuturism and I want to go there eventually. But in order to get there, I have to do the necessary work to create an aesthetic that would give birth to the type of Afrofuturistic art that I want to create.
Have you visited Africa, the continent?
No, I haven't. I want to so bad, but I have this whole thing where it's like I'm aware that not saying majority, but the ones I've come in contact with, they are not as friendly towards African Americans specifically. And I want to include that in my work. Like, where did that come from? Why do they have a name for us called a kata? And why, when you ask them about it, it becomes ambiguous. The definition becomes very ambiguous, and the history of that, and because we can, in order for us to sit at the table and mend our cultural differences, we have to go back and address the origins of some of these mythologies, or pathologies. So it's like, I haven't visited because of that, because I'm not sure how I would be accepted, and if I'm going to do that. If I'm going to create an Afro mythology through my artwork, I will have to do that someday, because otherwise the story will be incomplete. But right now, I'm starting with where I'm at with my life and going back with everything that has happened here on this side of the ocean. But if my artwork is going to grow in the way I expect it to grow, it will encompass me going there physically and being engulfed in, like, the culture that's there. And also understanding that, I must approach it delicately, because, again, Africa is not a country, it's a continent with many countries.
Yes.
And addressing that, and addressing in the artwork, why is it that African Americans view Africa as a country and not many continents? And I think that it doesn't necessarily have to do anything with lack of education or unaware of geography. It's just that in my place as a Black young boy growing up in rural Mississippi, I heard of this place that was big, beyond borders, big as shit, and it was different types of religions there, magic, and the people were jet black and beautiful, and I was like, oh, Africa, and I'm thinking of it. Nobody ever explained to me the geographical differences and cultural differences of the people there. In my mind, it's where we came from, and it's one big magical place.
Oh.
And all of it belongs to, I want to say belongs to me, because I can't claim ownership for Africa, but since I don't know specifically where I come from, I know I come from there, that place. And so, you putting that in the artwork and teaching our children, if I'm going to, go back and create that Afro mythology, also incorporating the cultural differences of different ethnic groups, that exist in West Africa, and doing it in a way where it's both intelligent and appealing visually, and pretty much inspires.
Do you think through current modern day artwork, and I want you to speak on this a little bit, it's like, do you feel like we spend a little bit too much time on past and not enough time at developing the future? I mean, like, we have so much history here in the United States. I mean, so much. And so much of it was infiltrated by, enough said about that. I mean, I don't have to go into all of that. We all know how it was watered down. And moving forward, like, how do we as, I guess, and I don't know. I mean, as tribal people, as many people as we are, I mean, your life, my life, our lives are different out in the community, and it varies from little segments, cities or whatever, to the next one. And we have a lot of talk about coming together, by unifying, about how, Black people here in the United States are always just all over the place. And some people use the word Black. Some people don't want to use the word Black. Some people it's African American, or they're not.
Or ADOS or stuff. Well, I'll say this. Just like people in West Africa aren't a monolith.
Right.
They're not all the same.
Correct.
I don't think we've been given that same grace, because they see 10% of who we are here in America, as far as criminals and stuff. Basically, what the media, what's popular in the media, the roles that African Americans have typically played historically in film, like
Correct,
the drug dealers and all that, the loose woman and all that stuff. They've seen that and think that that's all of who we are. When in fact, majority of the Black people I know came up with, especially in Mississippi, the people I came up with own their own land. They may have had trailers on their land, but that land was theirs and passed down. They grew their own food. They were hardworking. To have a criminal out there where I was from was almost blasphemy, because if you committed a crime, 9 times out of 10, you probably related to the person who you commit the crime of. So it's not a Black thing. It's just a human thing. You will always have, people who are just human, just doing human shit. But African Americans, we aren't allowed that grace, because if they see one African American on TV in the movie selling drugs and see that same type of character over and over again throughout films, then they're going to assume that that's all of who we are. And on the flip side, getting here in America, you'll realize that African Americans in California are completely different from the African Americans in the Midwest. The African Americans from California Midwest are completely different from the African Americans in the South.
Right.
And of course, there's a big difference between the African Americans in the Northeast.
Yes.
So it's like we're not all the same. And even if you want to be specific to a certain region, if you only want to focus on the South, the African Americans in New Orleans are completely different from the African Americans in Mississippi. African Americans in Mississippi are completely different from the African Americans in Atlanta and Miami and so forth. And then when you get into those small sections, the African Americans in New Orleans Parish is different from the African Americans in the East and the African Americans in Metairie. There's not a monolith. And it goes back to, it's not a monolith, and it goes back to what Toni Morrison said too, when, somebody asked her why she only writes about Black characters and how that's limiting her or limited her creatively. She said, but don't you know there's a whole different, there's a whole gamut of what African Americans look like. We got high yellow, we got dark skin, we got jet black, we got purple black, we got, caramel, we got mocha. So it's like, even if we are visually that different from each other, we can be the same amount of different from each other, here in the US. And it's like, when you get into that, you then have to understand, okay, how do we get to those places? How do we trace the roots? And majority of that can be traced back through the Great Migration. Yeah. The Great Migration weren't just Blacks going to New York and getting those factory jobs. It involved going to Detroit, migrating to Chicago, migrating to St. Louis, migrating to California,
Oklahoma, Kansas, farms.
So it's like, yes, majority of Blacks in America who are descendants of enslaved Africans, they can trace their lineage back to the South. But as far as mending those fences and those differences, I think it can happen, and it is happening. Look at what, prime example, rap music. I don't know if there's a difference between rap and hip hop, but I'm just going to say it.
I say there's a difference.
For me, I think rap music is Southern. And I think hip hop is New York or Northeast Coast, whatever. And if you look at what type of rap, even rap is not a monolith, or hip hop's not a monolith. When you look at that, what type of rap and what region has rap been dominating from for the last 10 years? The South. Ever since after Tupac and Biggie, where that happened with them, I think, if I'm right, but I'm remembering this as a teenager coming up and all that happening. The next big rapper came out of the South, and that was Master P. And then after him, Cash Money. Then you had, Texas had their moment with
UGK.
all that. Then you had Memphis. Then you had
This
Atlanta.
is totally out of my wheelhouse. I don't do hip hop.
So I'm just saying,
saying.
yeah, I'm like, it just goes to showing that we were never a monolithic people. And then, like, if you want to go back historically, let's go there. When they were putting, blacks on ships, from my understanding, they were making sure that they were mixing up different types so they can communicate together, like coming from different regions, ethnicities, so they can communicate, and how to take over, the ships and shit like that. But it's like, even then, like if you look at the coastal areas or coastal regions of America, like in the southeastern coast, you'll notice that you have the Gullah Geechee, which was centered in the Carolinas.
Yep.
Then you got down to Florida, that's a different type.
Yeah.
Those blacks, majority of them came from the Caribbean. Then you have those who, in the Gulf Coast area, from Mobile, Alabama, all the way back to New Orleans, different region. I'm assuming New Orleans, Congo, or maybe other, different types. Anyway, there was a mixture of different cultures.
Yeah.
And the African American contains all of those. Like literally, because I took the DNA test, ancestry test, and I was talking to this African artist who was visiting here doing Essence. And she was like, Black Americans, she literally said, you Black Americans are fucked up. And I'm like, wait, hold up.
Wow.
Hold
That's
up.
a mega statement.
Hold up,
But they're from the outside looking in.
They're from the outside looking in, and they've only been fed the images that they saw from, I call the 10%, through media. And it's like, as we got to talk, and I was telling her, how we're a mixture of all those, how we aren't a monolith. And I was telling her all the differences in culture and stuff like that, and even in food. She was like, wait a minute, I didn't think about that. We don't think about that. I said, here, look at my ancestry test. The first thing that popped up was Congo, then Nigeria being the second highest. And when I put that test online, and all the other Black Americans start comparing their tests, Nigeria was either in the first or second slot with the most. So that means, that speaks to something.
It does. It's so funny that you just brought that up, because my little cousin, she just did her ancestry, right? And she's my little cousin, but we have no idea who her father is. So she did a DNA little ancestry thing, and 50% was European.
See? It's a melting pot.
And then only I think it was 13% was Nigerian.
Yeah, and it goes back to being, a melting pot, and understanding that, in order to bridge the gap culturally, we have to first start here at home before we start reaching out to, distant lands such as, West Africa, and even going to the Caribbean. Like, we have to figure out, okay, how did everyone leave the South? Under what circumstances did they leave the South? Did they leave parts of their cultures behind? Where did they come from? Did they take some of those cultural, idiosyncrasies with them? How they prepare their food, and the types of music that they listen to and actually went on to create. And just going back and using art to dig up that, to excavate our culture, because so many people say, African Americans, you have no culture, you have no culture. And usually it comes from people who migrate here. And they don't understand that what they take as American culture, they don't understand that the American culture that they're copying and emulating is essentially African American culture.
Right. We even had this conversation way before we even started talking about this. Like, what is American culture? What is the United States culture? If we had to disseminate what that meant, we had many conversations about what that meant to be Black in the United States. It's just, in these conversations, I feel like should have been happening. It's not something that we should have had in his 20s. It's just like, I feel like I wanted these conversations growing up. I could really vividly see myself as a little fourth grader sitting there wondering about who I am as a person, and wanting to know more about my heritage and where I come from and what made me me. What made
could
my
you
family
imagine what would have
me.
happened if you had an art instructor?
I know,
Who,
and that's
who
what
told you, before you start on this project, you had to research things. You had to research customs. You had to research
and that the
your people.
information was actually there.
Yeah.
And that people can relate to and grow from that. And I can then instill in him, this is who you are, and this is why we did what we did. And if it wasn't a good thing, because not all good things from history are good to move forward. So I just wanted to know, from where we've been, how we've been, moving forward to now, how does the next 20 years look for Blacks, Africans, whatever the name you want to call yourself? Like, what does that look like in the next 20 years from your perspective?
For me, I think that, I say that, and I go back to social media, because it's one of the most distasteful inventions, but also it is one of the best because it is a tool of accountability, whether you want to admit it or not. If you've ever done anything or said anything, we got receipts, you know, we got
There's
the
one right here.
screenshots, we got the video screen recording, you
Always
know.
a receipt, yeah.
And it's like what it did also is that it allowed black people to have those social media for black people. And I'm specifically saying black people, but I'm pretty sure it's happening with Indians, Asians, you know, other
Correct.
cultures.
Yeah.
We are literally over the course of the last 10 years and probably on for the next 5, we are having a Tyler Perry table scene moment where we are getting all our shit just out. Well, I don't like you. Well, you slept with me. You know, we're getting it out. We're getting those cultural differences out.
I can agree with you
the
on
conversations
that one. It is
right now,
happening, yeah.
as we're sitting here doing this interview, there's probably 20,000 conversations taking place between West Africans, African Americans from the South, from the North, it's like those conversations, that table moment, instead of it happening like in a movie over the course of 2 or 3 minutes of arguing, it's literally happening over the course of 10 to 15 years. And I think we're going to reach a place to where we realize we have more in common, because on the flip side, just as much as I've seen those posts and stuff like that posted about, you know, our differences of us going at each other's throat, I do see African American children making funny videos and doing funny shit, and Africans be like, oh my God, I love black people. You know, like, and there's some things we've seen them doing, but like, you know what, that's that rhythm, boy, you know, that's that rhythm you can't explain. So it's like, it's happening, it's coming out, it's like a wash cycle. We're just going through a cycle. And I think for the next 5 to 10 years, you're going to see, with each generation, you're going to see them becoming closer and closer, because now, like, I remember being in the military, and a military buddy of mine, he was from West Africa, Nigeria specifically. He's the one that taught me about the word akata.
You teaching me?
Yeah, and he told me, he was like, you know, I want to do this business, you know, whatever. He said, I want to get the youth and from where I'm from in Nigeria involved. He said, but they're like not even interested in their own culture. I'm like, what are they doing? Like, he said, they know more about what's going on in America, specifically with black Americans, than they do what's going on in their own time. They have their phones. They can see stuff in real time as it's happening. And so the whole June 2020 protest with George Floyd that was happening all over the country, like, it happened all over the world because people were watching.
Yeah,
people are always watching, and that is the beauty of social media. Like, it was some solidarity. Like, I remember, because I screen record, keeping receipts. I was screen recorded I was up almost 24/7, like, when that whole stuff was happening. Because as an artist, I'm doing, you know, my thing, standing in the back in my little corner watching, you know, just taking, you know, notes. And I'm like, this is amazing. And it hit me when I saw Black Lives Matter march happening, a small one. This is before the big one happened in London.
Yeah.
A small one in London was walking through a neighborhood. They was like, Black Lives Matter. And she had a strong African accent, this black woman. She was like, yes, 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 yes. Like, she felt it. Like, and that's the thing that unifies us. We have all gone through the same fight, just on different lands, on different fronts. And that's why in the work, above my heads, wherever there's a head or a body in my work, you would usually see that symbol above the head with the 2 figures back to back with staffs extended in their hand. And that represents, you know, siblings, Africa and America. And we're always fighting, you know, some sort of oppression on our own fronts, you know. And it's like, we're seeing that on social media now. You know, you may have some a-holes who want to poke the button and say it, you know, Africans are better than African Americans. And then you have African Americans who are not completely innocent from that, you know, that dialogue that took place, because we all had the names, African Booty Scratcher, and, you know, we saw the commercials.
Yeah.
And again, it goes back to media. Growing up in the 90s, I would wake up at 2 or 3 in the morning and look at the commercial. You have Sally Struthers, whoever that woman was, the big lady, the big white lady who was like, send 50 cents a day or 25 cents a day to feed an African kid.
Oh, yeah.
We saw the images that they had on TV that played round the clock of African kids with snot from their nose, flies around their face, and bellies poking out. That was the basis of me knowing what an African looked like. And imagine what that did to me in my head as a black kid growing up in rural Mississippi, not having cable, only having the four channels. And one of those 4 channels is African kids with their bellies out, hungry.
Eating dirty rice out the ground.
Eating dirty rice out of the ground. Like, you know, old enough to have somebody to explain that to me.
And not dirty rice like we cook. I mean, like in the dirt.
Like they would literally have that. We've all seen those commercials, and it's like going back to where do I see us and what could happen in the next 5 to 10 years? Is that just allowing it to play out? Sometimes you have to step back, like Medea say, step back. It needs to happen. It needs to happen.
It needs to happen.
It needs to happen.
And see, then that's where my fear comes in, because I want to be more instrumental in them not falling down so much. And I think that's where my little anxiety plays in the role of where we come in as a community organization. The purpose of this is to let people know that there are better ways to do things, there are better ways to communicate, and there are better ways to learn, and that the solutions are in us, in everything that we're doing, and how you contribute to that. So I want you to give us a synopsis and close us out, as running out of time here.
Okay,
and we're going to do that, and then we're going to say how are we going to move forward with you as in the community member here. And I've heard elders say this before, that we need to touch what's in our reach now. So what would you touch right now that's in your reach, and what tangible thing, what homework assignment do you have for our community members?
Well, I will say this, and I may get a little flack for saying this, a lot of flack for saying this, but one thing I noticed about New Orleans, as an outsider coming in, black people in New Orleans specifically don't trust people, and they have the right to be that way. I'm literally listening to the conversations that how much black people in this city have been fucked over. Like, this place receives a lot of donations, a lot of grants and stuff like that, but they're not. Black people are being used as the face piece for that. The black people here have been used as a face piece for that, but they never receive any of the benefits from that. So they have the right to be skeptical. Black people, we are already skeptical anyway.
Always. Yeah.
We'll listen to what you say, but you got to show us first. But when you add that on top of a place like this, and this can be said for Jackson, Mississippi too, again, what's going on there now, like, they have a reason to be distrustful, especially of people who come here, migrate here, that looks like them. Because if they get stung, the sting hurts a little bit more when it comes from one that looks like you. So I have to approach that, as an outsider first and foremost. Because let's just call a thing. I am a gentrifier. Like, I was part of that. I don't want to label myself, oh, no, I came in, moved into a black community, with the little money, I had amassed at the time. And, I came here, and at first I was living here a whole year, and I had not contributed to the community in no sort of way. I was just someone who took and had my little New Orleans cuisine and still experiencing the city as a tourist.
Yeah.
And it's like I wasn't contributing anything whatsoever. And as a black person here, I know people say, well, it's not my responsibility. I just bought a home here, blah, blah, blah. No, you move here for the culture. And you can't come here and feed off the culture and get fed, from the culture and not contribute it. What is it that the Native Americans have when they used to kill an animal? You don't take everything from the animal. You take what you need.
Take what you need.
And you thank them for that,
And you thank them
and you
for
contribute, something back. And it's like, so now the question becomes like, how do I contribute? And how do I want to approach that?
Yeah.
How do I use the art to teach?
Correct.
And there was somebody who asked me before, like, I love your work. I love where you're going. I love the philosophy behind your work. Could you come teach? And I was like, no, I can't do that. That's not my thing. But then I realized, working with you, and we was working on this together, it came natural. I was like, I have so much in me that I want to show and reflect back to people who look like me. How can I contribute? And so that means us, at the Rosser Gallery, having workshops. That means, using an artist that you have on call to go out into the community and be almost like, missionaries. I hate to use that word, but missionaries for the culture.
Yes.
And reflecting back to them the beauty that they possess and excavating. Though, sometimes as artists, all the time as artists, we're given the vision to connect the dots that other people tend to miss.
Correct.
And so it's up to us to connect the dots to what happened before and how it affects or informs how we make decisions as people, especially people who look like us, how we make decisions going forward.
Absolutely.
And so you have to use art or whatever you have, whatever
Your
tool
talent,
you have,
whatever talent and tool,
whatever talent and tool you have, use that to show your people where they've been, where they come from, where they've been, how they've dealt with atrocities before. And if they, just in case they arise, this is how we deal with them now in a more evolved state.
Absolutely.
You know, how do you deal with, lack of funding for education? You supplement that by getting, supplementing that with stuff you can do at home. Even if that means as simple as you as a parent, as a black parent, going through YouTube and curating your child's YouTube experience. Put together a playlist. We create playlists all the time. Put together a playlist of videos talking about the history. To put together a playlist of videos talking about, Alvin Ailey and other creators. Put together a video talking about, Ruby Bridges and other civil rights leaders local, and give your child those assignments. If you're going to be online, you can do what you're doing online, but I'm going to curate at least 50% of that.
Yeah, and I would take that, one of those things from my ancestors and our elders. They make sure that we've learned, and they enunciate well to us what we are expected to do and how we move forward. So to build community and to keep that community alive, we have to keep art alive. We have to keep our talents driven and have it achievable.
Because this is a language we can learn to speak.
Oh, yeah.
And you can't erase this.
Yeah.
You can't erase this language. You can tear pages out of the book and you can even prohibit the books. But if you have places where this can be visible
and live
and have a life of its own, then you can't deny, showing your people who they are and where they have potential to go.
Thank you for breaking bread with us, Tony.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much. Appreciate you sharing your artwork, your talent, your brain, your energy, your frequency. So tune in for more information. We're going to have more artwork featured by
Adoa. Yeah.
And spell it one more time.
A''DOE''A.
And where can they find your artwork?
They can type in Adoa on Instagram. You'll see a lot of my ideas in the works there. I post a lot of sketchbook pages. I'm starting to get into the process of the habit of posting finished pieces of work. It's the Instagram is A''DOE''AH.
Great. Thank you for having us.
Same here.
Appreciate it.
Hey, what you talking about? Yeah. If nothing is for sure, nothing is for certain. If nothing lasts forever, then until they close the curtain. I'm just trying to find my purpose. Yeah. I'm just trying to find my purpose. Hey. If nothing is for sure, nothing is for certain. If nothing lasts forever, then until they close the curtain, I'm just